if you are new to us, we recap the episode beforehand and we cut that out, put that on YouTube. So if you're on that recap video, be sure to check the description below for our full discussion on episode 6 of WWW. And we also, I keep forgetting to say this, and sometimes I forget to do it, but if you are on that recap video, there will be timestamps in the full video, so you can just skip straight to the discussion, because that video will also include the recap. Anyway, on to the show, episode 6, Fresh Fish of Worlds Beyond Number. My friend, if you would take us off.
Absolutely, my guy. So this episode 6, picks up where we left off, which is the party. They've shoved the bone into the flower pot to try to signal to Will Gallows and a meeting with that individual. And as you may recall, they followed what appeared to be a lit candle of some kind in a window with eyes on the pot over in a nearby plaza. And where the episode left off was Ame essentially having this vision of some event, some cataclysmic type event in the past. Episode picks up there. Immediately, Ursulon does, I believe, lay on hands on Ame or does something to try to kind of help bring her back. And Ame then basically tells this vision she had. And these two characters in front of her are, we will come to find out, are two spirits, one of the sea, one of the, was it the earth or the forest?
The forest, yeah.
Yeah, right. And they essentially don't quite know what it means, but there's a bit of an unsettled experience there, or feeling there. And then our favorite character, the fox, naturally is extremely concerned that their master Ame is just went through this. The party continues into this building where this window was spotted. And they come inside to find this very bougie, well-to-do. I think Brennan described it almost like a museum that had been like repurposed in some way, or like some historical building that had been repurposed into. It is essentially like a gambler's lodge, so to speak. It is a place with all sorts. Actually, I'd say like a high-end casino is kind of where my mind goes. And this is the Ace of Wands. And immediately they are sort of amazed, not quite by the stuffiness. Ursula notes that he's never been somewhere quite so expensive and is immediately sort of put off by, I've lived this impoverished lifestyle and here I am now with my friends, really out of place. There is a host who is part snooty, part just more, I guess, a high-end, expecting high-end guests. Basically ask, how are you? What's your names? Ame gives them, like, here's who we are. We'd like to play. We'd like to play a game. And unfortunately, all the tables are full. And so they are instead led up to what's called the drawing room. It is kind of like this cocktail bar area where people come to relax and essentially wait for their turn to play a game. And so in this room, they order some drinks, some very odd drinks. What was it, like hot vodka or something?
Hot, warm wine.
Yeah,
and
warm
then Ursulon
wine.
had
That's
whiskey.
right.
Yeah, I've never had warm
Yeah.
wine.
It was very interesting. I don't know if this is a thing or if they were doing a bit or what, but all that to say, Ursulon, I think, has 3 whiskeys and like slams them down like one after the other. Is like, I've never had good liquor before. And they basically talk about like, what should we do? What's our game plan? The Fox, by the way, has never had alcohol before. And they're like, sure, which I don't know if this is like animal endangerment, but they're like, yeah, Fox, go ahead. The Fox quickly becomes drunk and not only becomes drunk, but very quickly moves into having a hangover where the Fox is like, I hate everyone. I hate everything. I hate alcohol. All this to say, they are trying to figure out what to do next. And they're basically looking around the room to see like, who do they notice? And in the room, there's a couple things that happen. Suvi hears chatter around some names that are mentioned that keep coming up in conversation. One of them is Payne. One of them is Moro. She doesn't recognize either, but there's a third one, and I can't remember. I think it was like Galvani or Galani or something like that. and I apologize, I can't place it,
See if I
but
can find it.
she recognizes this to be an abjurer, either from the Citadel or part of maybe from her past. I can't remember. It's not a significant name in the sense of like she's run into this person before. She just recognizes the name and is like,
Yeah.
I've heard that name before.
Sorry to cut you off. It is Galani, and it's an abjurer high up in the researchers' corps at the Citadel.
Great. Perfect. They also note this man who Brennan describes as having like a what's the actor's name? Sam. He's got this amazing mustache, and this guy has what appears to be a cudgel resting on a table, and is reading a newspaper. And
I think you're confusing two people. The
bartender.
The bartender was
the mustache guy. Yeah, that's right. Well, they do see the bartender and has this great mustache, but then there's this other gentleman who's kind of off to themselves, and they notice that this individual has clocked them, whereas everyone else doesn't seem to have. So Ame just gets up and walks on over and says like, "Hello, sir. Can I take a look at your newspaper? Like, I'm new here. I want to, not very smooth, honestly." And the person is immediately cold and standoffish and is like, basically, I have nothing to share to you. Like, if you need help, you can find it your own way. And even is very antagonistic in the sense of Ami's like, well, you seem like someone who knows the news. What are the happenings around here? And he's like, well, if I knew the news, then why would I be reading the newspaper? Like, kind of like you're a huge idiot, pretty much. And Ame basically is like, all right, well, sorry, thank you, and goes back to the group. And what we have seen to happen in every episode happens again. Suvi and Ame have this very awkward argument, essentially, where Suvi is like, why are you so careless in talking with people? And she explains that like Ame gave them their names and how, you can't do that and you have to be smarter. There's just a lot of hostility there. And Ame basically asks like, well, what name would you like me to give instead? And Suvi says, just say I'm Sky. My name's Sky. And there's also an insight check rolled there where it seems like there's something there about Suvi's name. A question around, is Suvi even her real name? Which more we'll talk about in the episode. All this to say, the person with the newspaper who becomes to be known as the Cudgel, because of the weapon that he handles, gets up, leaves. Long story short, comes back with this woman who, by the name of Arlie, who essentially comes to the party and is like, hello, like, what are you guys doing here? Like, or not in a threatening way, but just sort of like, yeah, hi, it's how can I help you? And basically offers to set them up for a private game, which they're like, let's have the private game. So they go to this private game, this private room, and immediately some characters walk in, most notably a man with pale skin and blue veins, almost like he's been struck by lightning almost, comes and sits at the table and is very quickly identified as Will Gallows, and is essentially almost like a mobster, is basically like, who knows you guys are here? And Suvi's like, well, it's none of your business. And he basically says, I'm venturing to bet that essentially if something was to happen, no one would ever have known you were even here. So there's very much this kind of back and forth on like what the party wants, what they know. The party basically says, hey, we're here because we're looking for the sword. We saw the hedge mage Finley, who we had given it to, and he said he gave it to you. And Ursulon with the nat 20 has an insight check to realize that by just saying that alone, he's just condemned Finley to death by Will Gallows. So kind of just a crazy moment. And all this to say, Will Gallows basically says, you can have the sword for 5,000 markers, Imperial markers. And they're like, well, we can't do that. And so then Will Gallows basically says, well, if you can't do that, what we can do instead is there's a man by the name of Payne who is, I think, either a mage or something, but who works basically for the ship battalion. I can't think of their name.
The Azure Battalion.
Yeah. And essentially, this person has been siphoning off funds from the Azure Battalion for their own betting and scheming and what have you. And basically tells the group, like, hey, I want you to go take care of them, essentially. Um, and from that, if you do that, then the sword will be yours, basically. So the party, there's a little bit of a conversation around Suvi's role and like what would that mean for her relationship with the Citadel and especially the Azure Battalion. But all that to say, they eventually say, "Okay, yeah, we'll as long as we have a friend in you." And he's like, "You're not my friend, but go do this job for me." All that to say, the party accepts the new quest, and that is where I guess we'll break it up there. And you want to take it from that moment on?
Yes, sir. And Sam Elliott is the mustache guy.
Thank you.
I googled
Thank you.
famous mustache guy, and
Oh my gosh,
um,
that's great.
so we pick back up. Will Gallows and his men have left, and basically like Suvi immediately throws up because she's kind of like nervous and
Yeah.
doesn't know like what she's gotten herself into. She now may be like doing something to harm one of her fellow mages. Um, and so they kind of like take a moment to regroup. And they leave the Ace of Wands. And when they do, the hostess, who I believe her name was Lila, she hands them all a playing card that I think they're aces, Ace of Wands, but they all have the number 4 on them. And she basically says 4 is Will Gallows' table. So basically, like, should they come back, when they come back, this is like their card to get in,
Mhm.
essentially. Um, so they leave, and they are, Ame had her little episode with the fountain. They just had this kind of really high anxiety encounter. They're like, let's just find a place to sleep for the night. So they look to Ursulon, as he is the one familiar with this town. Um, and he wants to stay someplace, nice, but he realizes, I'm 5 gold in the hole from borrowing that
Mhm.
money from Suvi for the silk cloth. Maybe even more money in the hole because he borrowed money from Suvi for the drinks. So he's like, let's just go somewhere I can afford. So they go to this place nearby that is just, this kind of beaten down
Yeah.
Motel 6, essentially. And they get a single room for 3 copper that they're all just going to split. And the only really detail we get before they go to bed for the night is that through their window, they can see those lights out in the ocean, the same ones
Mhm.
that they saw coming in. The next morning, everyone's hungover, or mostly hungover, including the fox, like Blake alluded to. And Ame makes this blue liquid with her alchemy kit to kind of rehydrate everybody. It's basically Gatorade, it seemed like. And then there's this moment where Ame and Suvi kind of apologize to each other for their little tiff that Blake mentioned in the first half of the recap. And Suvi just reiterates again that, you just need to be careful with my name. Um, and like Blake mentioned, there's this kind of like this moment of like an insight versus deception check where I think Aabria states above table, yeah, it's like a lie of omission. But I
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think Ame rolled high enough to get any more information than that. And we'll dive into that in our discussion. But yeah, she says, refer to me as Sky in the presence of strangers. And Ursulon says, yeah, if you want, you can also call me Bear or Toma. I've gone by both of those names.
Yeah.
Um, so they're basically like, okay, what's the plan? Um, and Suvi does, I think, a history check. And basically, what she puts together with that check is that, you know what, maybe it's not so bad if we went and kind of did this to the guild mage Pain, because if he actually is stealing, then like that's what the Citadel would want me to do. Like, we want to turn in people that are stealing from
Mhm.
the Empire. So she's kind of like self-rationalizing it that way. And, presumably that's going to be the course of action that they take. But before they make any more moves, Sui lets it be known that like, hey, tonight, or let's stay somewhere nice. And Ursulon's like, hey, yeah, that would be great, but I'm already in debt to you so much. I just, this is all I could afford. And there's this like really heartfelt moment where Suvi's like, you don't just look like my brother, you are my
Right.
brother. Like, you don't owe me anything. Um, and Ursulon, like, he appreciates that, but he says, I want to do the honorable thing and pay you back.
Right.
Anyway, they head downstairs to leave, but before they do, they stop the innkeeper, who we find out their name is Arthur, and they basically have a quick discussion, and they realize this place has fallen on really hard times, and they are quite literally the only guests, the only room rented in the whole place. And they notice the surrounding neighborhood is basically a ghost town. The roads are overgrown, things are shuttered up. Um, and Arthur explains that, yeah, ever since the closure of the gate, we're no longer the first inn that people come across when they land in Port Talon. And he says it's because of the wild growth of the kudzu coming in from the forest, and that is what all this witch fire is about, trying to keep that at bay. So they ask more about it, and he says, it started about 2 years ago, but really it was only a few months ago things started getting really bad. It just
Hmm.
erupted, seemingly overnight. And he tells of this one anecdotal story, I guess, of people literally watching this kudzu devour a house like in real time.
Yeah.
So this is like a big problem. And the big wall that they've seen in Port Talon was actually erected to like help keep this kudzu at bay, and to keep the people inside safe. Ame says, "Well, is anybody taking care of the forest shrine? Since this wall is up and blocking it." And Arthur says, "No. The people that live there, they had to move out."
Right.
They then ask him about the wizard lights out in the ocean, and he says that's the wizard Derek's, but doesn't say anything more than that.
Yeah. People are like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what a Derek's is. Maybe we'll dive into that into the discussion.
I think it's like a I think I'm gonna say this, but it's only I'm realizing as I say it, it's only because it rhymes. I think it's like a barracks.
Oh, all right. Well, more on that later. But he doesn't know any more than that. Um, but before they leave, kind of having this moment with the innkeeper and realizing they're having a hard time, Suvi does give him a gold and says, "We're going to rent the entire floor for two
Right.
weeks." So he's hyped about that. Um, but Ame then actually asks Arthur if, he can share any local mythology. And Brennan, basically how he handles this is he says, "All right, I'm going to roll a luck check." And like, depending on how well he rolls, it will, be what he divulges. And I didn't write it down, but he rolled pretty well. So I'm just going to run through what he shares here. First and foremost, he says that shrine she was asking about is about a day and a half away. Um, but more importantly, he says that before Port Talon was Port Talon, the lords here were said to host great spirits. And the first castle that was erected here was actually said to be a gift to the grandson of Naram the Wave Lord and Orima of the Reaching Green, which are the spirits from the statue in
Mhm.
the fountain. Orima was this conquering spirit queen of the forest whose father was a great battle lord of the sky, and only the gentle touch of the waves could calm her fury, aka Naram. And Naram taught the people here how to fish, how to swim, and he was the lord of gentle seas. Um, Arthur also tells them that the Golden Crest is a fisherman's village on the edge of town, and if they do go over there, a way they can get in good with them is to like touch their brow and say blessings of Naram. It's like a gesture they do. Um, Finally, Ursulon does a history check on Orima to see if he is familiar with this from the spirit world, and it does ring a bell. And he remembers that one of the only times he saw his father turn around and change direction was when he found out where he was heading was where Orima was. So he was like, "Nope,
Mhm.
I'm not going that way anymore." Um, so after that, they leave, and Ursulon wants to go check on Finley, given what Blake was talking about in the first half, where they basically realized they had condemned him to death. And another really cool moment here is Brennan says, "Well, you slept. It's been a night, so Finley might already be handled." And he says, "So I'm gonna have you roll." And he tells Lou to just pick odds or evens. And Lou picks evens and rolls a 16. So they go to Finley's, and luckily he's still alive. Though as soon as they step in, he pulls the throat cut maneuver again. Is like, ah. They're like, "Hey, stop. We know what you're doing." Um, they tell him that, "Hey, Will Gallows is after you," and there's this really funny sequence where he's like, "Oh, I'm out of here then." Um, Gathering up his things, and as he does, Suvi is like, "Well, let me see if I can like nab anything while he's distracted." So she runs in the back, but as soon as she opens the door to the back, she hears Ghost's voice, and there's like a spell activation. And Ghost's voice is like, "Oh, hey, just a minute. Like, I need a second. I'll be right there." And so Suvi like closes the door, and does not progress further. Um, so they decide to leave after Finley, takes off, and Ame is like, "Hey, Fox, want to go get that trash?" And he is elated, so happy that she remembered. So he
Mhm.
sprints out towards the trash heap, and is dismayed because it is no longer there. It's now covered in just all of this rubble. And what has happened is this rubble is from the workshop that has been demolished as part of Ghost's escape. She had that spell that Suvi heard, which was just her voice as like an alarm kind of to buy herself time, as a distraction against Finley. But she broke out, took the candle golem with her, and presumably made her way to the Azure Battalion. Um, so the crew leaves and they are making their way toward the Guild Spire. And we're told that this is where the crown mages reside. And Suvi walks up. There's guards outside, and she's actually wearing a disguise. It's not that important, but she has to drop the disguise for them to recognize her and be allowed entry, which she does. They recognize she's a wizard of the Citadel, immediately let her in. But before they can go through the actual doors, there's kind of a magical pat down that needs to happen to make sure that everything's on the up and up. And this magical pat down, if you will, pings the fact that Ursulon is wearing a glamour, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna need you to drop that glamour." And Ursulon lies and says, "Oh, I'm horribly scarred, horribly disfigured. Like, can I please just leave this up?" So he has to roll a deception check. And a great moment here is the fox actually gives him the help action because he's a little conniving guy. Long story short, Ursulon does beat the DC of the check, so they let him keep the glamour. Everyone is let in, and they're placed down in a waiting area for the guild mages to come and greet them. They eventually do, and the spire, Brennan describes it beautifully. The mages eventually come out from like this door that opens beneath a waterfall, and there's a number of them, but they're led by a mage wearing all white. And as he comes out, he is so honored to see Suvi. He instantly recognizes her as, the apprentice to Archmage Silence, but also as the daughter of Soft and Stone. And he is just so happy that a Citadel wizard is here to see what these guild mages have been up to. And there is literally this explosion of fireworks and like this chanting of Suvi's name that happens. And that's where the episode ends. Again, this was episode 6 of Worlds Beyond Number, Fresh Fish. And if you want to see our full discussion, again, that'll be linked down below.